It's 12:29 in the morning, April 23rd, 1967. Vladimir Komarov, a colonel in the Soviet Air Force, is standing at the Baikonur launch site in Kazakhstan. Behind him stands a massive 50-meter rocket. In front of him, a simple ladder. He knows two facts that no one else, at that moment, is willing to admit out loud. The first, the capsule he is about to pilot has 203 documented defects. A solar panel with a failed opening mechanism, an unstable navigation system, a parachute at risk of not deploying. 203 problems, all recorded, all with the signatures of the engineers who found them. Komarov cannot let that happen, so he refuses to fly. They will send the backup pilot. His name is Yuri Gagarin, his best friend, the first human being to orbit the Earth, and the most famous face in the Soviet Union. Komarov cannot let that happen. So he climbs the ladder. He enters the capsule. He closes the hatch. In 26 hours, rescue teams will find the Soyuz 1 module in flames on the Orenburg steppe. The metal is melting. And among the wreckage, the only recognizable fragment of Vladimir Komarov's body is a splintered heel bone. Just a heel bone, the only piece that remained. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the moment when a date on a political calendar was worth more than a man's life. In this video, 3 questions will guide everything. First, how did a spacecraft with 203 documented defects get approved to fly with a human being on board? And who signed that approval? Second, what exactly happened during those 26 hours Vladimir Komarov spent alone in space, knowing the mission was lost? And third, and this is the most disturbing one, was Komarov's death an accident? Or was it a choice made in Moscow, in a room where no one was looking up at the stars? To understand what was happening in April of 1967, you need to understand the panic in Moscow. Between 1965 and 1966, the Americans launched 10 Gemini missions. 10. Orbital rendezvous, spacewalks, docking. The Soviets, who in 1961 had put the first man in space, Gagarin himself, were now watching the United States turn that historic advantage to dust, mission by mission. But then, in January of 1967, something changed. An accidental fire inside an Apollo capsule on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral killed 3 American astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger Chaffee. The American lunar program stopped. The window to the moon opened momentarily. Leonid Brezhnev saw the opportunity. He wanted a spectacle for the world to see. 2 Soviet spacecraft in simultaneous orbit. Cosmonauts transferring from one to the other in space. A feat the Americans, paralyzed by the Apollo 1 disaster, were nowhere near attempting. And he wanted it before May 1st, before Labor Day. The date carried symbolic weight, and in the Soviet system, symbolic dates were not postponed. The order came down through the chain of command until it reached the engineers. And that was when the engineers opened up the Soyuz 1. The report was 10 pages long. Viktor Yevzikov, senior engineer on the Soyuz development team, coordinated the pre-flight inspection. The result was a list of 203 structural failures identified in the capsule. Solar panel opening mechanisms with unpredictable behavior, unstable orientation systems, and, the problem that would kill Komarov, known defects in the descent parachute system. The report was ready, documented, with engineers' signatures. No one wanted to deliver it. In the Soviet system, being the bearer of bad news to the party had consequences that went beyond one's career. Veniamin Rusev, a KGB agent assigned to monitor the space program, tried to route the document up the chain of command. The result was immediate. He was removed from any future contact with the Cosmonaut Corps. Vasily Mishin, the program's technical director,
refused to sign the airworthiness certificate for the descent capsule. The capsule was certified anyway by another official, and the launch was kept on schedule. But there was a detail that made everything even more complicated. Gagarin knew everything, and Gagarin did not stay quiet. In the weeks before the launch, he and the engineers compiled a detailed report, the same report listing the 203 problems, and addressed it personally to Brezhnev's secretariat. Was the document delivered? Did it reach the leader's desk? There is no historical consensus to this day. Some sources say yes, that it was there, that he read it, and approved the flight anyway. We need to stop here for a moment, because it's easy to hear this story and think, why didn't Komarov simply refuse? It was his right. It was his life. All he had to do was say no. But the system didn't work that way. In the Soviet space program, refusing a designated mission, especially one with political weight, wasn't just a matter of courage or cowardice. It was an act with consequences for the entire team around you, for your family, for your colleagues. And there was something more specific here. Komarov knew that if he refused, the mission would not be canceled. It would be reassigned, and the designated backup was Yuri Gagarin. So the leadership would never put Gagarin in that spacecraft. If Komarov refused, they would choose another pilot, any other, someone without the protection of the symbol, someone who would die in Komarov's place, without the same capacity for refusal, without the same historical weight to invoke. It was Rysayev, the KGB agent, who heard from Komarov the most direct explanation. If I don't do the flight, they'll send the backup pilot. It's Yura, and I can't let that happen. Vladimir Komarov climbed into the capsule knowing what would probably happen, to save his friend.
The launch at 0032 went as expected. 5 minutes and 26 seconds later, the first solar panel failed to open. The spacecraft was operating on half its intended power. Systems began failing in sequence. The orientation antenna lost stability. The navigation computer became inoperative. Manual control consumed power reserves that simply didn't exist. At Mission Control in Moscow, the engineers watched in silence. They knew exactly what they were seeing. And they knew that the second part of the plan, Soyuz 2, carrying 3 cosmonauts, set to launch the following day for the orbital docking, was already compromised. Soyuz 1 couldn't hold a stable position for the rendezvous. Soyuz 2 was canceled, officially due to a storm. Komarov spent 18 orbits trying to keep the spacecraft functional. On the 13th, he transmitted to Mission Control. The mission was lost. They decided on an early return. In his final transmissions before re-entry, Komarov spoke with Gagarin. Gagarin was at the tracking station in Yevpatoria, monitoring in real time. The words they exchanged in that moment were not fully documented. Some were recorded, others history lost. Atmospheric re-entry happened within parameters.
The drogue parachute opened. The main parachute did not deploy, trapped inside its canister by a manufacturing defect that appeared in the 203 problem report. Komarov manually activated the reserve parachute. The reserve tangled in the lines of the drogue. 2 parachutes, neither working. Soyuz 1 hit the ground on the Orenburg steppe at 40 meters per second, nearly free-fall velocity.
The rescue teams arrived by helicopter. The capsule was on its side, the parachute spread across the burning ground, the metal in flames. The retro rockets, which should have fired a few meters before impact to cushion the landing, began firing there on the ground, feeding the fire. There was no radio code in the Soviet Union for the death of a cosmonaut on a mission. The officer on the scene fired a medical emergency flare. The only recognizable fragment of Vladimir Komarov's body found among the wreckage was a heel bone. In the Soviet Union, the news was controlled, the details suppressed. The official narrative, a hero who died in service to the motherland. in an accident during a pioneering mission. The report listing the 203 defects remained outside the public record for decades. Gagarin survived for 1 year.
In March of 1968, 11 months after Komarov's death, his training jet crashed near Moscow. The official circumstances were classified as an accident. But in the months before, Gagarin had been speaking publicly, which was unusual for him, about the failures of the space program. He had told fellow cosmonauts that he wanted to speak directly to Brezhnev, and that if he confirmed the leader had known about the problems and approved the launch anyway, he would know exactly what to do. What exactly happened to Gagarin in March of 1968 was never fully explained.
This is where we need to widen the frame, because what killed Vladimir Komarov was not a technical failure. Technical failures exist in any complex engineering program. What killed Komarov was a system, political, institutional, hierarchical, that made it impossible to say no, that punished the bearer of bad news more severely than the creator of the problem, that placed a date on the calendar above a human life. And that system did not die with the Soviet Union.
In 1986, 19 years after Komarov, reactor number 4 at Chernobyl exploded. Engineers who knew about the RBMK design flaws had been trying for years to raise the issues. The test that caused the explosion was conducted because there was a political date that could not be moved. The local party secretary had pushed for continuation. The operators who raised concerns were ignored. Also, in 1986, 7 American astronauts died when the Challenger broke apart 73 seconds after launch. Engineers at Morton Thiokol had sent memos the night before the launch warning about the behavior of the O-ring seals at low temperatures. NASA managers wanted to keep the schedule. That evening, President Reagan was going to mention the mission in the State of the Union address. In 2003, Columbia disintegrated on re-entry. A subsequent analysis showed that engineers had identified damage to the wing during the flight and requested satellite imagery for assessment. The request was denied by program managers. Always the same pattern. A technical document that travels up the chain and disappears. An engineer who is silenced or ignored. A date that cannot be moved. And someone, a cosmonaut, an astronaut, a reactor operator, who pays with their life for decisions made behind closed doors.
In organizational science, this is called normalization of deviance, the tendency of complex systems to treat known problems as within acceptable limits until they no longer are. Diane Vaughan, a sociologist who spent a decade studying the Challenger, described the process with an unsettling clarity. The risk doesn't spike suddenly. It is gradually redefined as normal, piece by piece, decision by decision, until a catastrophic failure seems to those inside the system like something that simply happened. Vladimir Komarov knew he was flying in a capsule with 203 defects. The engineers knew, Gagarin knew, Rasayev knew, the system knew, and the system flew anyway.
The Soyuz program was suspended for 18 months after Komarov's death. The capsule was completely redesigned. The parachute systems were revised. The solar panels were tested under conditions that should have been tested before. And the spacecraft flew again in October of 1968. It worked. It kept working. Versions of the Soyuz carried astronauts and cosmonauts for more than 5 decades. To this day, it is the most used crewed transport vehicle in the history of space exploration. One man's death bought that safety. Vladimir Komarov received a state funeral in Moscow on April 26, 1967. Open casket, as he himself had reportedly requested, according to those close to him, so the world could see what remained. His remains were interred in the Kremlin Wall, in Red Square. In July of 1969, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon, Armstrong left on the lunar surface a small packet of memorial objects in honor of fallen cosmonauts and astronauts. Vladimir Komarov's name was among them. On the moon, 2 days away, there is a fragment of the memory of a man who climbed into a broken spacecraft
so his friend would not have to die.
And the last recorded words of Komarov, received by a tracking station near Simferopol, seconds before final re-entry, were, "Thank you. Tell everyone what happened." What exactly he meant, no one knows for certain. That he had made it, that what he feared had come to pass, that the mission was complete, that Gagarin was safe. He never had time to finish the sentence.
After everything we've seen, there is still one thing historians debate. The 203 defect report, 10 pages, compiled by Gagarin and the engineers, addressed personally to Brezhnev. Did it reach him? Some sources say yes, that it was on his desk, that he read every line, and signed the launch approval anyway. If that's true, then Vladimir Komarov's death was not a failure of the system. It was a choice made by one person in one room who knew exactly what they were signing. And that changes everything. Not about what happened on that launch pad in Baikonur, about who put Vladimir Komarov there.